Hello and welcome to the What If podcast presented by Suicide Prevention Scotland. I'm Amy, and over 4 episodes we're going to build on our mission to have Scotland's biggest ever conversation about suicide. That means meeting some extraordinary people, each of whom bring their own lived and living experience of suicide. Together we're going to discuss things you might not have heard before, and some of what we talk about might even make you feel uncomfortable. If you are struggling or worried about someone else, you'll find details of support in the show notes or over on our website suicideprevention.scot. Now, while you might know me from TV or radio, I'm here presenting this new series because I know what it's like to lose someone you love to suicide. I lost my partner Wayne to suicide back in 2018. It remains probably the most traumatic, life-altering experience that I've ever had in my life, and I wasn't prepared for all the complex emotions and the kind of grief that would come afterwards, and I certainly wasn't prepared to then feel suicidal myself. All of this tells us that suicide is closer than you might think. It's been estimated that 135 people are affected every time someone takes their own life. In 2023, that would mean over 106,000 people in Scotland. So we're talking families, friends, colleagues, professionals experiencing that devastating impact of loss. It really does reach deeply into society. It's still the single biggest killer of men under 50, and you're 2.5 times more likely to die by suicide if you come from the most deprived area in Scotland compared to the least. In this episode, we'll discuss what suicide is and, most importantly, what we can do about it. So in this episode, we're going to talk about what exactly suicide is and what we can do to try and prevent it. I'm very pleased to be joined for this episode by Rory O'Connor, Professor of Health Psychology at the University of Glasgow, where he leads the Suicidal Behaviour Research Laboratory. Rory's the author of the book, Why People Die by Suicide and What We Can Do to Prevent It. And Rory, I know you also lost your close friend Claire to suicide, and the professor who guided you earlier in your career, Noel. We also have Natalie Dakhill, who founded a place called Here with her husband Anton, and that was following the death of your dad Michael last year. Natalie, face-to-face peer support group that Natalie set up helps people living with suicide bereavement, and it's been established in Glasgow to help people through that really complex grief that we can face. And we have John Gibson, who is CEO of the Canmore Trust. John founded the charity with his wife Isobel following the death of their son Cameron to suicide in 2019. They support people at risk to find a safe space that allows and encourages them to stay in the world with a 24/7 support service available via text. I always want to say it's lovely to see you all, but I'm just so aware of the one thing that unites us all and has brought us together, and it is not a nice club to be in, as we know. Rory, I'm going to start with you. We hear this word, suicide. How do we actually define suicide? What is it?
That's a great question to start, Amy, and I'm delighted to be here with Natalie, John and yourself and talking about this really important topic and that we're all obviously sadly bereaved by. And we think it's a simple thing to define what suicide is. So technically the definition is that it's self-inflicted death. But it's often very difficult to determine how a death happens and so on. So often what we try to do is to try to piece together the complex story of people's lives, what happened in the days, weeks and months and even years before somebody ended their life. So for me, the most important bit is if a family member, friends believe that person's death was self-inflicted, to me that's suicide. And then really what we're all trying to do then, and what we're all here today, is to try and understand this complex phenomenon, because understanding is the crucial bit to prevention. If we understand it better, we hope we will be able to prevent other people experiencing this devastating loss.
And it's just, I mean, Natalie, I know you lost your dad Michael. It's still very early on. I mean, I lost my partner in 2018. John, I know it was Cameron in 2019. For you, it's a lot. It's more fresh than that. The complex grief that you feel after something like that, how do you even put it into words?
really difficult to put into words. I think probably the first word that comes to my mind was isolated, was how I felt. When I lost my dad, I had so many people around me, but it was the most isolated I'd ever felt because nobody wanted to speak about suicide.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people would say, "How are you?" They would never mention my dad. They would never mention how he died. They would completely avoid it. And I felt so isolated because of how he died and the stigma that comes with suicide. Nobody wanted to approach me or any of my family members and actually say, how do you feel that he's actually died by suicide? How does that feel? And that's what I was looking for. I wanted to speak about it. I tried to understand it. You know, I had all these feelings and thoughts going through my head and I was like, why is nobody approaching me?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to the GP and like naively thought I was going to get this big reaction. I remember going in and saying to the GP, I lost my dad to suicide and I was expecting this reaction. And he was just like, okay, are you sleeping well? Like, do you need antidepressants? And I was like, no, I'm not depressed. I'm totally traumatised.
Mm-hmm.
It was suicide, you know, and I was waiting for that reaction. And it was like, obviously GPs hear it probably most days, you know, so to them it was, you know, the norm for them. But for me, you know, this was the first suicide death in my family, so I just couldn't understand how nobody wanted to speak about it. And that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to speak to people that had been through it. So isolation was definitely the first, you know, feeling that I felt. And I was like, as I said, I had so many people in my life, but I was so lonely. Mm-hmm. And that's how I came up with the idea of the group, because I was like, I need to speak to other people that understand this. And that's been really critical for my healing.
Yeah, just being able to speak to other people who have been there, John, and I know you're nodding there. It's something that, you know, you'll understand as well, that feeling of isolation afterwards, and just all the questions, mm-hmm. all the emotions that you probably had never experienced before. Even if you'd suffered another loss, it just, there's no, mm-hmm. you can't compare it to any other kind of loss, I've found.
And I think that's absolutely true. And the word that we as a family used was carnage. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good word, because I wouldn't have described any other death in my family as carnage ever before. Mm-hmm. I lost my mum and dad to natural causes. They were old people in the years following Cameron's death. And we miss them and I've grieved, but there's just nothing like the grief of a suicide death. It's just utterly traumatic. And for me, it was like swimming through oil. That's how I described it. I couldn't see. It's a strange feeling. Everything I tried to touch, anything I tried to do just felt so bizarre, so foreign to me. I just was trying to grapple for something that I could hold on to that was in some way normal. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't. And so 8 months after Cameron died, I entered my own suicidal crisis because I couldn't find anything to hold on to.
Is that common, Rory? Because everything that Natalie and John have just said there, I completely can relate to as well. And I actually remember seeking people out on social media who had been bereaved in this way, but were maybe a little bit further down the line than I was. And I just wanted somebody to tell me I would survive this, which was such a strange thing, because I was really lucky. I had a great support network of family and friends around me, but I needed somebody who knew what this was like to help and tell me that this would be okay, even though they couldn't change it or give you answers. Is it common, that feeling of just looking for something to hold on to, some reassurance from somewhere? Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think what Natalie and John have said, and you, Amy, as well. I mean, it's so common, the isolation, like that is, bereavement is difficult anyway, but there's that uniqueness about a suicide death is unbelievable. And in that isolation, and there's so many complicated emotions, because there's often guilt, there's shame, there's all the what ifs, and then even this podcast, what if a conversation could save a life, all those things. And I remember actually, John, John and I met, actually, John got in touch with me not long after Cameron had died, and I remember yourself, Isobel, and I having a conversation at Costa Coffee in Glasgow, and And I remember that you both, we were just broken, but you were, neither of you, you were at such an early stage, you were still trying to make sense of the devastation. And actually, I just think also, you remember we met in a BBC studio, obviously, and it wasn't long after you'd been bereaved. And I think what everybody's doing at that stage, everybody grieves differently. But the complication is you're trying to get an answer to a question which is not answerable. And then on top of that, you're then trying to deal with these complex grief reactions. And it is isolating. And I think that's why conversation like this, the group you've set up, Natalie, if we can normalise these conversations, but in a way that we're still doing it in a way which is protective, which is respectful. And I think for me, in all the years I've been working in this area, your stories are so common. And I think that we have moved forward in some respect in trying to have more of these conversations. But yes, we've made progress. But the reality is, when an individual death happens, that bombshell that goes off, that social bombshell, then that doesn't protect an individual from the crisis. And each one of you said you're all reaching out, even though like that's that idea of being alone. Both you, Amy, and you, Natalie, said that sense of being, even though you have people around you, you're still that sense of being alone. And that aloneness, even with people around you, that's why these conversations are so important, because none of us know how we'll react when that devastating news comes through.
And that's, I think, what is so different in every case, as well. As much as, you know, we're all here, unfortunately, in this club together, everybody's response and individual situation will be so different. And I'm sure you found that, Natalie, through the bereavement service that you've started, is people are coming to you with completely different experiences of suicide. It isn't just this umbrella term that fits every death. The circumstances and everything that will come into an individual death are so different.
You're right. I mean, every person that comes to the group, their story's different. The relationship to the person that they've lost, you know, everybody's got a different story. But what I've found is the emotions are very similar. We all identify with each other in the sense that at one point we've all felt guilt, shame, anger, despair. And although our stories are all different, the emotions are the same. And that's what we get, identification. In that room, when we share our stories, we identify with each other and we're met with understanding. People understand that and see just the relief that comes with that. So when we started the group, it was 9 months after my dad had died, and didn't have any expectations it going to be like busy or anything. We just put a social media post up, arranged premises, and then, I mean, John, you were there the first night. I mean, no pressure. I was like CEO of the Canmore Trust. Turns up, and you know, it was a great night, wasn't it? The first night.
It was an amazing night.
And it was really busy. But for me, the relief I got that night was just everybody in this room like that. Different circumstances, but we could all identify with each other, but there was no judgment.
The amazing thing about that night was there was laughter in the room as well, which really, I think, took a number of people by surprise, that you can go from 30 people crying together and then 30 people laughing together. And it's the security of that place that's so important. Yeah. Because everyone gets each other. There's no need to say, oh, I'm sorry I laughed.
Yeah.
Everybody gets it. It's beautiful.
And people have obviously tried other grief groups, and then they've came to our group and been like, this is what I've been looking for, because I've had to hold back on how I really feel in other settings, because I don't want to traumatise anybody, or I don't know how they feel about suicide because of the stigma that comes with it. But in here I can say exactly how I feel, and there's no censorship in our group. It's a safe space, it's confidential. What gets said in there stays in there. And we do find joy again. We can laugh without feeling guilty. And like you were saying, you were looking for people that were further down the line. We have people in our group that are 30 years down the line, 10 years down the line. We have people who are just a couple of weeks, and they're getting hope by the people that are further down the line.
And it's a wave, isn't it? I remember not long after Wayne died, one of my good friends sent me this poem, and it was the waves of grief, because I remember thinking that I would get to this point a few months down the line, and you know, I suddenly would be handling it better, I thought, or I would have I'd been going to counselling and I was speaking to people, and I thought I'd come through the worst of it. And I probably had my biggest setback about 6-7 months later. And it's that feeling of you never get to a point where you're over it, or you can ever fully deal with it. It just gets a little bit easier. It's like that weight eases a little bit, but it's always there, isn't it, John?
I agree with that. And we've just had a major family event at the weekend. Our daughter has just had her first grandchild. And it's absolutely fantastic. The joy is wonderful. But there's a 10% part of your heart, your brain, wherever it is, I don't know where your soul centre is, that says, well, Uncle Cammy's not here. Uncle Cammy, who would have loved to hold this wee boy and would have adored him. And suddenly you're crying again, not with the joy and delight. It's those events are difficult. We've been to weddings of Cameron's peer group, and they've been so gracious to invite us to those weddings to maintain that connection. And they're wonderful, and they're utterly painful at the same time. And the phase that we're in now is, I don't know what it would be officially called, Rory, but it's the loss of potential phase for us. So the acute stuff has dissipated, but every day we're faced with the reality of loss of potential. Where would Cameron have been now? What would he be doing? Would he be married? Would he be in a relationship? Would he have a wee baby? What job would he be doing? Where would he be staying? It's all gone. And it's awful.
It's halted futures, isn't it? Really? Those futures that you'll never see. But I think the thing I suppose struck me with all like Amy's comments, John's and Natalie's, is the one thing we know about grief is it's unpredictable. Right? There's no predictability about grief, and the number of, and I think of my own experience, personal experiences, but then all the people I've met over the years, is the minute people think, oh, things have got better, there is a setback. And I think I remember a father years ago saying to me, the way he described it is it's not about moving on, right? It's not about moving on. It's about moving forward, step by step. And sometimes there'll be a step back and then another step forward. And I think the other thing struck me just in the conversation is there's three words come into my head and you were speaking in particular, Natalie, is like, right, so safety, identity and validation, right? So what the space that the Canmore Trust provides and your group provides is a sense of space, safety. And often in that acute phase, you don't think you'll ever feel safe. And then the second bit is the thing that none of us will ever change is being bereaved by suicide is now part of our identity. It's a part of who we are. And it's about embracing that and understanding that and using that hopefully for good. And then the third bit I think was coming to my mind is a sense of validating your feelings, right? Because it's such a complex thing. You're grappling with it. It doesn't matter if it's 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years. There's always something you're trying to make sense of. And I think groups are having these conversations. It's so vital for us to validate how we're feeling, to recognize it's okay to feel the way we feel. And it doesn't matter if it's a day or a year or a month or 10 years later. My last bereavement was in 2018 and I still get really emotional days when something happens, or I think about something that our memory comes back and I go, what on earth, what could I have done differently? And we all have those what ifs. And I think that's the validation bit. And it's okay to have those what ifs.
Mm-hmm. It is. And it's, as you were saying, John, it's the fact that when you're surrounded by people, and you were saying this as well, Natalie, when you're surrounded by people who do validate, as Rory's saying, and understand that it is such a complex web of emotion. And as you say, it'll come up, John, whether it's the birth of a grandchild and you just think of that loss of potential, or whether it's anger that comes up, or I only actually realised fairly recently that I still have a lot of PTSD, and I've been in a couple of situations where something has triggered it. And it's all of these things that you just you're living with.
And I think for me, one of the important moments was when I realised that I was actually angry with Cameron. Mm-hmm. And it's something we work with clients now a lot about, because so I'd already faced the reality. I was clearly the worst father that ever existed. I had the shame and the guilt of all of that. I don't believe that anymore, incidentally, and that a therapeutic approach. But I was going through all of that. Why did Cameron not speak to me in those final moments we were really close. Why did my son not phone me and say, Dad, please, can you help me? And then I had my own suicidal crisis, and I realised why, because I would have stopped him. Yes. Yeah. So all of that is ongoing, all of that. And as I worked through my phases of grief, I realised the thing that I had just pushed away was an anger with Cameron. And I was very angry. And I remember the day when I let out, and I thought I would never, I threw myself on the ground. I thought I'd never walk again. I thought it was awful. Because all the guilt and all the shit. I can't be angry with my son, for goodness sake. That's re-entering a circle that I can't get back out of. And it lasted for about 48 hours, and I came out the other side really quite different, having admitted that I was angry. And it was actually quite a powerful thing to be able to do.
But you push that down, don't you? I mean, I felt the exact same, Natalie. I don't know if you felt like this. You feel like, because you want to continue the memory of this person and their legacy, how can that fit with anger?
Completely.
You know, how can I
Completely.
feel so angry at Wayne and everything that happened, and all the things that happened before as well that were particularly traumatising? How can I be angry when I'm also trying to, you have 2 children and a family, and how do those things fit? It's really hard.
I've not experienced anger towards my dad yet. That's not to say that's not to come, and I know, John, you touched on it, that came at a later date for you. Because my dad told me how much pain he was in. He was very vocal about how suicidal he was. So I suppose my anger is probably more directed at the lack of support he got in his final days of, voicing his clear intentions of how he felt and how he was going to do it. And so my anger there's anger there, but it's not towards my dad. But maybe that's still to come. Don't get me wrong, my 6-year-old son, he was Papa's boy. That was his, he talks about him every day. And, I just feel really, really sad that my dad's not here to see him grow up. And, that's really hard to live with, because my son speaks about him every single day. He's got pictures in his room, and every time he sees a rainbow or a feather or anything, everything's a sign for Papa. Every motorbike that drives by, everything's a sign. That's just that deep pain, that ache, that crushing feeling I get. But maybe later down the line I'll feel anger towards my dad. But at this point I don't. But that's not to say I know that this is like a forever thing. This journey is forever, and I'm learning so much from the group, because like people that come to the group are decades down the line, and they still have these really difficult days and difficult emotions that come up out of nowhere. So I know that this is forever, and that emotions will probably come and go, and I'm only like a year and a half down the line, so I'm trying not to think that when I'm having good days that this is it, I'm good.
You just take each day as it comes, and that
day at a time.
That does continue, whether you're a year down the line, 5, 10, 20. I'm sure it's the emotions will come in different ways at different points. Rory, the thing as well is, it's probably through having more conversations like this, every suicide is different, and there will be different contributing factors. There will be different reasons. It might be, like Natalie was saying about her dad, and I was a similar situation with Wayne. All the warning signs were there. There'd been multiple attempts. There had been, there'd been a lot of warning beforehand. But then there are other deaths where there seemingly isn't a warning, and it can come completely out the blue for people. So they are all so different.
Yeah, no, so, every suicide is unique. But I suppose what we've been trying to do over the last 30 years is try to identify what we see as the common features or common factors. And so, Natalie, you mentioned pain. So for me, when I think about suicide and what causes suicide is driven not by people wanting to die, but wanting to have unbearable pain to end. And sometimes that pain is obvious. You were saying it was obvious in your dad's case, but in other cases, I know in Cameron, it was so difficult to try and find signs. And so it's trying to recognise that we from the outside, it's often difficult to see. We can't get inside the mind of somebody who's suicidal. But from all the work we've done, with looking at thousands upon thousands of people who've either attempted suicide or died by suicide, is suicide. People become suicidal when they feel trapped by unbearable pain, and that sense of entrapment is often driven by feelings of defeat and or humiliation. And of course, life's complicated, so defeat and humiliation could be triggered by shame, by rejection, and by loss. So for me, when people ask, well, why do people become suicidal? My answer is always this. It's because people feel defeated by life or feel trapped by life and they see no alternative. Suicide's like the ultimate way of ending the pain. And then the question becomes, well, what are the drivers? What were the things that happened in that person's life usually? What led them to feel defeated or led them to feel shame or feel rejection or loss? And often it's difficult to find those answers. Some people it's more easy to understand, but others it's really, really difficult. And I think if we recognise that we'll never know the answers why either one of our losses, any of the losses we've experienced, we will never know truly why that person died by suicide. But for me, that recognition, if we try to understand their life in terms of defeat and entrapment, and the two bereavements I've experienced, I can make some sense of their deaths through that framework of defeat and entrapment.
It's one of the hardest things to have a conversation with someone, isn't it, John? But it's so important that we do, because you spoke about your own suicidal crisis, and I experienced the same after Wayne. And I remember thinking, I wish somebody would just ask me about this. And I remember feeling quite frustrated when everyone else would talk about, just reach out, just talk, just do this, just do that. And my feeling was, as someone who feels really suicidal, the last thing I'm going to do is I just felt I was never going to speak to anyone about it. But I felt if somebody had reached out and said, are you feeling suicidal, Amy? I would have admitted it.
Yeah. And I think that is probably true of me. I have a little bit of a concern with some of the words that we currently use around tomorrow might be a better day, or there's always hope, or think about tomorrow, or it's okay not to be okay. Maybe it's not okay to be okay. Maybe it's not. Because maybe this is the day that you might consider taking your life. So I think we have to be really careful about the words that we use. Really important that we don't offer false hope. Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things we hear about all the time in the clients that we work with is that young people in particular are really struggling with the brokenness of the world. So we've got bullies that internationally are gaining reputation and repute, and that seems to be okay, but we've told our kids forever, don't let the bully win. Well, the bully seems to be winning. We've got wars, we've got Gaza, we've got utter brokenness. We've got a sense that there might not be a tomorrow because there's going to be this global climactic catastrophe. Mm-hmm. And our young people are really struggling with that sense of hopelessness. And I think that contributes to what Rory is sharing. And I also think for young men, one of the things that we pick up a lot is that there's quite often a broken romance. There's quite often something around relationships that have stopped for whatever reason. That and we know that suicidal behaviour is most evident in young men. And I wonder, Rory might want to comment on that, whether that's a genuine aspect or that's something that we're falsely picking up. It would be helpful for...
No, that's not at all. No, not false at all. I think the issue with the young people, I think, is a real concern. And a number of people, same as you, John, a number of people I've heard, young people in particular, are really concerned about the global picture, and climate change is another issue, not to mention all the issues that you've mentioned. But for me, at the heart of understanding suicide is about human connection, right? And it's about, it's like thwarted human connection in some way. And remember, in the mind of somebody who's suicidal, that their mind's playing tricks on them, right? So we know that idea of tunnel vision, not seeing alternatives, seeing that only way in which I can manage this pain or my distorted reality of human connection is through this blinker system. And the problem then with that blinker system is that it can lead you down to this path of suicide as the way of ending that pain. And so for me, when we're thinking about the conversations around suicide and trying to have safe conversations, it's about recognizing that suicide is not about one thing. It's complicated. There's many factors, but suicide doesn't have to be the answer. And I think that's the message. I think I like your point, John, about some of the sort of sayings we have now. It's okay not to be okay. Of course, I understand where they're coming from, and in balance, I think they're a good thing. But I agree entirely. We need to be careful that it's not okay. So it's okay not to be okay for you. And so then that's, as you say, that's the day in which you might end your life, because we should be trying to prevent every single suicide. And that's the challenge we all face.
Yes.
And the reality is, isn't it, Natalie, to do that, we can't gloss over and have these conversations or just see these slogans. We need to talk about what this actually does, how this feels. And for those of us who have been bereaved, just how difficult and brutal is always a word I use. It's a brutal
Great word.
thing to go through for the individual and for those who've been bereaved. But we need to be honest about it. We need to have real honest conversations if we want to try and prevent it happening, even if it's to one other person. And I'd be interested to know if that's the what when you thought, and I can see, John, your face, I thought, if just one person, if I can stop one person doing this, I'll feel like Wayne hasn't died in vain.
We've had quite a few people come to the group like that, have been in a suicidal crisis because they can't see a way forward, living their life without their child that they've lost to suicide. And you know, we've got a private room that we can take people into and have an intervention and like that. I don't mess about with my words now, more so than ever. I never really did before either, but more so than ever now, I'm like, are you feeling suicidal? Like, how are you actually feeling? Tell me what's happening, you know. And you can actually see the relief when you have when somebody just breaks the power of that feeling, you know, that how did you know that? You know, and it's like, and I'm like, well, what can we do about this? You know, and it's just that you see the relief when they just break the power of that and just saying it out loud, and then that's when you can start putting plans in place and actually just, you know, I've got you. You're no longer alone. I think that's dead important, because when you're feeling suicidal, I've not felt suicidal, but this is just experience for speaking to people who have. You know, when they've recovered from that and they're feeling better, and we always go back to that time when we had that conversation, they always feed back that just you asking me out loud, it was like you were in my head, and it was like, I'm no longer alone. And that was just a relief to just say that out loud.
I think the importance is, here we're talking about words again, the importance of using the right words. Because I think the right words are you thinking of taking your life? And I think as Scottish people in particular, we're very good at making things feel a bit better for ourselves or for others. So often what I hear is someone will say, you're not thinking of doing something silly, are you?
Yeah,
and you're then bringing judgment into the room. So I think we have to be really clear that the right phraseology is, you know, are things so bad that you're thinking of taking your life? And we call it the double bounce in the Canmore Trust, because often people will say, no, don't be ridiculous, come on, it'll be fine tomorrow. And you need to ask it again, because often people will say, no, I'm fine. No, this is serious. You know, are you thinking about taking your life? Are you having those thoughts? So the second bounce of the questioning is really important. And it's often on that second bounce that you get the, you know what, I absolutely am. And talk about community, and suddenly you're in that place of community. You know, I've been there. Have you? Can you help me? Have you experienced have you seen what I've seen? Yeah. And I understand what a dreadful place this is. But this doesn't have to be the answer. It's so important. This does not have to be the answer.
The research confirms all that. So there used to be this myth of if you ask somebody whether they're suicidal, but plant the idea in their head. There's just no evidence for that. Indeed, the evidence is the opposite. It shows it could be the start of a life-saving conversation. But and the only thing I would just add is, so if you're out here if you're listening or watching this, right, and you're frightened, and it's understandable to be frightened to ask that question. For me, the two things, it is a difficult question to ask, right, definitely. But as long as you keep in mind, if you ask it with compassion and without judgment, you're not going to do any harm. And for me, the advice I always give is, all you need to do is validate how that person's feeling. So in validation, all I mean is, if somebody says, I'm feeling suicidal, just reflect back to them, my God, that must be difficult. that must be really difficult for you. And you don't have to solve their problems, but it's been exactly as both John and Natalie have said. This is about, you're part of this community. Okay, let's see if we can work together, and we can then move forward and say, is there somebody you can speak to? Do you need to speak to your GP or whatever it might be? And it's so important. So if you're watching or listening, please, if you're concerned about somebody, please ask him. And as John says, ask him directly. Don't go around the houses. Mm-hmm. Be Irish, I would say, not Scottish.
Be direct.
Be direct.
It's, you're absolutely right, Rory. I'm just going to ask you one final thing, each of you. Mm-hmm. What would you want somebody to take away from this conversation or your experience?
I think just having the courage to be able to have these conversations. You know, it's okay to have these conversations. I think you'd say that, Rory, it can be frightening. People are so scared to ask the question. But I think it's so important. It will save lives. I think you don't need to have it all figured out and know everything and have all the answers. Just be compassionate, you know. You can put a plan in place, but asking the question first, that's the first step to helping somebody. And just being frightened of that. Because I know from the feedback for all the people that come to the group that didn't ask the question, they live to regret that their whole lives. You know, they wish they had that opportunity to ask that question. But it's too late now. So ask the question.
John, what would you want someone to... It's such a broad question.
But it's such a beautiful question because it's a legacy question, isn't it? You know, we've lost. How would we want someone not to die? A brilliant question. And I think for me, suicide is, and Rory mentioned this earlier, is about incapacitating pain. And I would want to say that suicide doesn't end pain. Suicide passes that pain multiplied, I don't know how many times, onto the shoulders of those left behind. And I would just ask you to stop in your moment of utter despair and utter brokenness and just reach out for help. Let's save a life. Let's save as many lives as we can. Got to do something. Let's do it.
And you absolutely are one of those people. 100%. I completely agree with you. I think I always say, if anyone speaks to me, please don't make a forever decision based on how you feel right now. I know it's hard. I know it is so hard. And there's no point, as you say, dressing it up that things are going to just get better all of a sudden. It's not going to be a quick flick of a switch. But as somebody very close to me who also sadly has found themselves in a similar situation of feeling suicidal, they said to me, just keep making the bed.
Fantastic.
Just get up and make the bed. Even if you don't do anything else, just keep getting up and making the bed. Yeah. And yeah, even the days you don't want to be here, because you'll come through it. You will come through it. And it can be a hard road, can't it, Rory? But it's holding on for those moments of hope where we can find them.
No, absolutely. And I suppose just adding to what both you and John have said, Amy, is when you're in the depths of a suicidal crisis, you think it'll never pass, right? And you think you're a burden on those around you, and the world will be a better off place without you in it. And I suppose if you're experiencing a suicidal crisis now, please remember suicidal thoughts are not permanent. They pass, they come in waves of utter intensity and utter pain, but that does recede. So just to echo what both you and John have said, Amy, is so please hold on, and that crisis will pass. Yeah, it may not be this second, but let's do it minute by minute, hour by hour. And that idea of even simple things can interrupt those suicidal thoughts. So you're trying to do as much as you can so somebody in a suicidal crisis doesn't cross a precipice from thinking about suicide to acting on their thoughts. Please hold on.
Rory, John, Natalie, thank you for being so incredible, so brave, so honest on this special podcast. And as Rory says, if you are worried about yourself or someone else, support is available. You can head to our website, suicideprevention.scot. My thanks to Rory, Natalie and John for joining us in the studio. Remember, if you are worried about yourself or someone else, support is available. You can find all the details in the show notes or visit the website suicideprevention.scot. That's also where you can learn much more about the work of Suicide Prevention Scotland, the community of people and organisations who work together to deliver the Scottish Government and COSLA's joint strategy, Creating Hope Together. Thanks very much for joining us. Be well.